am getting sleep paralysis every night, and I think the demon is taking over me. Late February's bone-chilling wind rattled the windows of my apartment, each gust a ghostly whisper, urging me into the comfort of sleep. Yet sleep was no longer a refuge. It had turned into an abyss, one I dreaded to cross for the past few weeks. My nights had been haunted by a relentless presence, one that paralyzed me in the dead of night. At first I thought it was merely a product of my overactive imagination, but the terror had ground tangible. It began innocuously enough, an occasional feeling of unease as I drifted off to sleep. I dismissed it as stress. After all, who wasn't stressed these days? Work deadlines were looming, and personal life seemed to be on a perpetual roller coaster. I shrugged it off, attributing the strange sensation to the endless caffeine and lack of rest. The first night it happened, I awoke in the early hours to find myself unable to move. My eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that would explain the dread gripping my chest. The air was thick, oppressive, and in the corner of my vision, I saw a shadow darker than the night itself. It lingered just beyond the edge of my bed. I tried to call out, but no sound came. My throat tightened, as if being strangled by invisible hands. The shadow seemed to pulse with a melt. When dawn finally broke, the paralysis lifted, and the shadow retreated, leaving me drenched in sweat and gasping for air. I convinced myself it was just a nightmare, albeit the most vivid one I'd ever experienced. But as the nights wore on, the occurrences grew more frequent and increasingly real. Every night the paralysis returned, and with it the shadow. It became a sinister ritual. I'd lie there, eyes wide open, feeling the weight of the demon's presence. I could sense it watching me, waiting as though it thrived on my fear. It began whispering to me, its voice like nails scraping against a chalkboard. The words were foreign, ancient, and they reverberated in my skull long after I woke. Desperation drove me to research sleep paralysis. The internet was filled with explanations, scientific, psychological, even spiritual, but none of it provided solace. I stumbled upon forums where others recounted similar experiences. They spoke of shadow people, demons, and dark entities that plagued their sleep. One story in particular caught my attention. The writer described a demon that fed on fear and slowly took over their body. Doubt gnawed at me. Could it be that the demon was not just a figment of my imagination? The thought alone was enough to send shivers down my spine. I confided in my best friend Mark, who, while supportive, seemed skeptical. He suggested I see a sleep specialist or a therapist. I agreed, though my heart was heavy with the burden of the unknown. I sought help from Dr. Emerson, a renowned sleep specialist. After listening to my account, he diagnosed me with sleep paralysis, explaining it as a temporary inability to move or speak while falling asleep or upon waking. He reassured me it wasn't dangerous, just terrifying. He prescribed medication and recommended a sleep study. While part of me wanted to believe his words, another part, the medication dulled the edges of my fear, but it didn't eliminate the occurrences. If anything, it made the nights more torturous. The paralysis felt more pronounced, the whispers louder, the shadows. Proximity grew closer, its presence more invasive. I could feel it inching its way into my mind, planting seeds of darkness. Days turned into weeks, and my condition worsened. My waking hours were a blur of exhaustion and paranoia. I began to see the shadow out of the corner of my eye during the day, a fleeting figure that vanished the moment I turned to look. The whispers echoed in my thoughts, making it difficult to concentrate on anything else. My work suffered and my relationships strained under the weight of my growing obsession. One particularly harrowing night, the shadow enveloped me. I could feel its cold, clammy fingers tracing the contours of my face, its breath hot against my ear. When I awoke, I found myself at the edge of my bed, fingers clutching the sheets with a grip so tight my knuckles were white. The whispers still lingered, an echo of the night's terror. Desperation clawed at me. I needed to find a way to rid myself of this demon before it consumed me completely. I reached out to a paranormal investigator, Sarah, who had a reputation for dealing with malevolent entities. She listened intently as I recounted my experiences, her expression a mix of concern and curiosity. She agreed to help and arrived at my apartment a few days later, armed with an array of equipment and a determination that bolstered my hope. The night of the investigation was the longest of my life. Sarah set up cameras and sensors around my room, explaining that she would monitor any unusual activity while I slept. I lay in bed, heart pounding, waiting for the inevitable. The paralysis seized me with a ferocity I hadn't felt before. The shadow appeared more defiant and malevolent hunger. I could hear Sarah's voice in the background, urging me to stay calm, but it was drowned out by the demon's whispers. It spoke of a realm beyond our own, a place where it ruled with an iron fist. It promised power, knowledge, and immortality in exchange for my submission. I could feel its influence creeping into my thoughts, tempting me with visions of grandeur and glory. In that moment, I knew I had to fight, summoning every ounce of willpower. I resisted the demon's allure, focusing on Sarah's voice as a lifeline. The struggle was intense, but I refused to give in. The demon's whispers grew frantic, desperate, as if sensing its grip on me slipping. Suddenly, a blinding light filled the room and the shadow recoiled, retreating to the farthest corner. The paralysis lifted, and I could move again. Sarah stood beside me, her face pale but determined. She explained that she had performed a cleansing ritual, invoking protective energies to ward off the demon's influence. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of relief. The demon's presence had weakened its hold on me, diminished. Sarah warned that the battle was not over, but I now had the tools and knowledge to defend myself. With her guidance, I adopted practices to strengthen my mental and spiritual defenses, creating a barrier between myself and the darkness. As the days turned into weeks, the occurrences grew less frequent. The shadow's visits became sporadic, its whispers faint echoes of what they once were. I began to reclaim my life, piecing together the fragments of my shattered existence. While the demon's presence never entirely vanished, I learned to coexist with it, refusing to let it control me. And so each night as I lay in bed, I braced myself for the possibility of its return. I knew the darkness was always lurking, waiting for a moment of weakness to strike. But I also knew that I had the strength to resist, to fight, and to persevere. For now I found solace in the knowledge that I was not alone, that even in the darkest of nights, there was light to be found. And with that light, I would continue to battle the shadows, determined to reclaim the peace and safety that sleep had once promised.